was the middle of the night when I woke up to a light tapping at the window across from my bed. The room was decently big, with the bed pushed against the wall in the center of the room, and two smaller closets to the left on either end of the wall. A window was next to the closet in the far left corner of the room from the bed, with a TV beside it. Before I went to bed that night, I had turned on light rain sounds on the TV, and so it was playing quietly in the background while I sat up in bed, tired and weary. The knocking turned into loud thumps that made my heart race and my palms sweaty. By the sound of it, I could have sworn someone, or something, was standing outside the window, pounding on the glass, which wasn't unreasonable considering the room was on the first floor, near the entrance of the building. Looking at the alarm clock on my bedside nightstand, I realized it was very unreasonable. It was 3:15, which, of course it was. Why wouldn't I wake up at the witching hour with tapping on the window and this utter dread filling my stomach? I don't understand how I missed it, because she was standing right next to it. Beside the window, or rather, a little in front of it, was a girl with long, dripping, wet, black hair cascading down her face and body, basically hiding all of her from how long it was. She was wearing a worn-out white dress that ended on the floor. I couldn't see any limbs at all. She reminded me of that girl from The Ring, just less TV-like and real. For a good 10 seconds, I just stared at her, waiting and watching, praying that this was some sick nightmare that I was about to wake up from. The panic hadn't yet set in either. When I realized she wasn't moving or doing anything, I slid under the covers, biting back tears of fear. I was 14 then, not young, but not old either, so the fear was pretty reasonable. After taking a few deep breaths and encouraging myself to look again, she was gone. She just vanished. The tapping on the window hadn't ceased. If anything, it got a bit louder. It also started raining after a few minutes of me just sitting there, staring at the spot where the girl once stood. Around the age of 19, I was disqualified from the military due to a medical condition. I wasn't sure what to do with my life, since this had been a lifelong dream, and I felt very lost. During this time, I did a lot of soul-searching, studying many religions and philosophies. At some point, I got into occultism, the law of attraction, meditation, and finally, astral projection. To keep it short, I started meditating to attract into my life the things I wanted, and I also began to practice astral projection. After a few weeks, my aunt started to come into my room, scared, and began to question what I was doing. I told her I was meditating quite frequently, sometimes up to 3 hours a day. Why was she asking? She told me that something very weird had just happened in the house. In fact, for a few days now, several weird things had been happening. She told me that while they were watching TV, the front door of the house unlocked itself, and the door had just been slammed open. They told me things had been falling off counters, and my uncle was seeing things from the corner of his eyes. She didn't ask me to stop. She actually seemed intrigued. My aunt is into crystals and all kinds of groovy stuff. I kept this going. I wasn't able to astral project yet, but I was able to get parts of my body to leave, as weird as that sounds. I was able to remove my arm from my arm. It's a very odd feeling to describe. It feels like your arm is paralyzed, yet another one you can fully manipulate and feel is coming out of it. I was also able to do this with my right leg. For those who are not understanding what astral projection is, it means leaving your body. I'm not sure if your soul leaves your body or if you project it mentally. All I know is it's very real. I'm not here to persuade you one way or the other, but it's a thing. Supposedly, you are able to soul travel by doing this. In any case, a couple of weeks go by, and my uncle and aunt need to be gone for a couple of days, and I have the house to myself. So what do? Have a girl over like any normal guy would? No, I meditate and try to leave my body. By this point, I'm obsessed. For the first time, I fall asleep while meditating, and what proceeds to happen is one of the most traumatic and terrifying things to ever happen to me. Who am I kidding? It's by far the most terrifying experience of my life, and it haunts me to this day. This is the part of the story I don't like telling anyone, because they dismiss it as a nightmare or, it's just sleep paralysis, bro. I don't care what you decide to call what I'm about to tell you. If you want to label it as fake, it was more real than life to me. I have astral projected a few times. I never saw anything very interesting other than my own home, freaking out my dogs. Mostly what I do is fly over lakes, factories at night, and the city. I can never do it for very long. I have not mastered it, and nowadays, I avoid the practice altogether, although it happens involuntarily still from time to time. What I experienced in this instance was different. It felt more physical, it felt more real, and I was attacked by God knows what. I wake up, laying flat on my bed, facing up, arms wide open and legs spread apart. The TV is on. The show Ink Master is running. It's night, but the room has a natural light to it, almost like a full moon. I see a shadow in the corner of the room. I try to get up, but I can't move. I'm paralyzed. I start being able to move, but I feel heavy, like trying to swim underwater. The shadow gets closer to me, and then crawls on top of my body. This is embarrassing to say, and I normally leave this part out of the story. This thing proceeds to put its hands between my legs and press and squeeze. You know, I feel immense physical pain. There is actually something gripping my body and really hurting me. I try to scream, but I can't. I start saying, "The power of Christ compels you," over and over, but it does nothing. My back starts to bend in an arch, and I'm slightly levitating over my bed. Everything is happening very silently, which allows me to hear loud footsteps coming from the kitchen. While this is all happening, a man walks from the kitchen into my room. I can barely see or look, but he is a middle-aged man wearing a suit, looking very old-fashioned. After several attempts of asking, my words finally come out. "Who are you?" The man standing in the corner of my room states, "My name is Lucer." I then ask, concerned, "Lucifer?" He states, "No, Lucer." The painful back arching and floating continues for a while, and then suddenly, it stops. I fall on my bed, and it's suddenly daylight. Ink Master is still on, and I can hear birds chirping. I never woke up from this like waking up from a dream. It simply stopped, and I was still awake. I spent the entire day looking things up online, trying to make sense of what happened. When night came again, the same thing happened. This entity, or whatever it is, grips me the same way and hurts me. You have to understand the pain is very physical and excruciating. I can feel its hands and fingers, and this time, I'm very upset. For one reason or another, this time I'm not afraid, and I start trying to strangle it. I start asking it to get me out of my body so I can confront it, and suddenly, it all stops, just like that. After this second episode, it never happened again. From time to time, I am still attacked by an entity that looks like me, and I am forced to fight it. But these are more like vivid nightmares. nothing like the situation I just described. I quit meditating. I quit trying to astral project, and this situation never happened again. I still involuntarily astral project in my sleep sometimes, but it's very uneventful. I don't see other entities or have bad or good things happen. I just float over a lake near my house and enjoy the view for the most part. Maybe there's more I could share, but I think I have shared enough. Thanks for getting this far. I never found out who Lucer was. For those who have asked if the Lucer entity was helping or not, I have no idea. I've spent years trying to figure out who that was and looking through my ancestry to see if it was a relative. Nothing. His energy didn't seem negative at all, but neither did it seem benevolent. It didn't seem like he was involved in it in any way. It seemed like just someone passing by who saw all of this happening. My parents had built their dream house in a new subdivision at the time. They had chosen a lot that did not have any neighbors yet, and the history of the place was still unknown. I remember the first day we moved into the home. Something about it felt off, especially in my and my sister's room. Our rooms were the corner rooms on the second floor, and we shared a balcony. My parents had also built a small nook space next to the windows, where it was long and wide enough for you to either sit or lay in. On our first night there, I had fallen asleep on my phone, lying on the mattress on the floor since there was no bed frame yet. I was a light sleeper, so despite being asleep, I could feel like something was at my feet, as if someone was holding my ankles down. I managed to sleep through the night, but the feeling never went away, even after a few days had passed. Terrified, I convinced my sister to let me sleep with her in her room the following night. Her bed was positioned next to the wall, and I had moved my mattress next to hers, with my back facing the window. Around 2 a.m., I woke up, and that unsettling feeling started creeping in again. I wanted to shake it off and needed confirmation that it was nothing, so I took a peek. All I could see was what seemed like a dark figure standing in front of our window. Alarm bells rang because our rooms were on the second floor, and there was no one else upstairs since my parents' rooms were downstairs. A few seconds later, I could hear tapping on the window, but refused to look back. I tried to quietly wake my sister up, but she only shifted her position and turned to the wall instead. I was too scared to get up because of the terror I felt. Instead, I inched closer to my sister and turned my back, pretending to be asleep despite hearing the taps. In the following nights, cousins or friends who visited our house would report hearing a woman crying and the same tapping noise whenever they slept in the upstairs rooms. Our rooms were often used as guest rooms, and if both were occupied, we would sleep with my parents. My parents often laughed or shrugged it off because they didn't believe in the paranormal or the afterlife. One day, while talking to the guard on duty on our way to the jogging path, my mom mentioned that we were new in the area and where we resided. From the guard's reaction, we could tell he was familiar with our residence. He told us that before the area was made into a subdivision, there were houses in the area, and just like now, the house built on our property had been isolated. A mom, her husband, and their 3-year-old daughter had lived in the house. The house had caught on fire on the first floor and was spreading upstairs when the family awoke to the smoke. Their daughter was sleeping in what is now my sister's room, while the wife and husband had slept in what was now my room. Their room door had melted shut, and the mom had used the balcony door to try to reach her 3-year-old's bedroom, but it too had melted shut. She attempted to save her daughter, banging on the window in hopes of waking her up. Despite her husband's attempts to get them both out of the house, she refused to leave, trapping all three of them in the fire, resulting in all of them passing away. I couldn't help but wonder if the shadow, tapping on the window, and the sound of a woman crying were from the same woman who had died in the house, desperately trying to save her baby, but failing. That night, as I tried to sleep, I could envision the mom wailing in front of the window frame, banging on the glass, the noises slowly fading to taps and weakened cries as the fires consumed her and her family. I would say I am very aware of the paranormal and things of that nature. My parents' house is over 100 years old and is next to the Catholic church my mom, brother, and I were baptized at. Now, this is where it gets interesting. In the 1950s, during the middle of a sermon, the priest who was living in the house attached to the church was having a heart attack or something of that nature. The people living in the house at the time brought him to their bedroom, which is now our living room, where he later died. Years later, when I was about 8 or 9, I had just woken up from a nap on our recliner in our living room and was still groggy. I remember Mom had a plant in the middle of the doorway for some reason, and as I turned my head to see where I was going to avoid bumping into the plant, for 2 seconds, I saw a man without a face, but was wearing a hat. I don't know if it was a trucker or baseball cap, but it was a hat, maybe 3 feet in front of me. The only reason I know it was real is that a year later or so, I was watching TV in Mom's room and was about to get up to go to the bathroom. When I looked at the door, I saw the same guy standing there for a couple of seconds, and then he was gone. I've heard things too, but nothing was as creepy as those experiences, besides hearing my mom's voice twice. Once when she was at work, I heard her call my name from the dryer room downstairs and asked Dad if Mom was home, and he said no. The other time, my mom, Dad, and I were all home, and I heard her call my name from the top floor, but it didn't feel right. I didn't respond for a couple of minutes, because it felt off, and I know never to respond if it doesn't feel right. I asked Mom if she called my name a few minutes ago, and she said no. Those aren't even the weirdest things that happened. I have a long-distance girlfriend. She and I talked on the phone every single day for just a little over a year before we physically met. She'd always tell me about how she'd always see the previous owner walking around the house, who died naturally on the patio, but she never once described what he looked like. The day happens where we finally meet wonderfully and everything goes normal, until I wake up at about 3-ish in the morning to take a piss. She's still asleep, and I get up and walk past the closet next to the bathroom. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw what looked like a guy with glasses wearing a blue flannel but didn't see any legs. It took me a second to register what I just saw, and I looked where I saw him, and he was gone. I take my piss, not really worried about it, go back to the room and ask my girlfriend, "So you know the guy, does he wear glasses and a blue flannel?" She said, "Yeah. Why?" I said, "Well, I just saw him." That still gives me chills to this day, almost 3 years later. Last summer, I even asked her if she ever saw him near me. She said she saw him standing behind me as we were cooking, and that gave me even more chills. This was the first time since high school that I had seen anything, and it's also the last time currently that I've seen anything. I don't know what it is because I'm not religious anymore, more agnostic, and this shit creeps me out and fascinates me at the same time. My house was built at the end of the 1930s, and construction was completed in 1940. Since I live in Germany, the owner of the house was drafted into the war, and the house was immediately turned into a prisoner of war camp by the Nazis. The owner died in World War II in 1944, so the house was used as a prison camp from 1941 to 1945, when the Nazi regime fell. After that, the house was likely abandoned for many years before being renovated in the 1980s. One part of the house was torn down and rebuilt, but this was likely just a small portion. The majority of the house remains the original structure. Given this history, it's very likely that many people died here. Now, I'll explain what has been happening. Often, when I'm sitting in my room on a chair, I feel a hand touching my shoulder, which disappears as soon as I turn around. It's not a hard grab, just a soft touch. Sometimes, when I'm lying in bed trying to fall asleep, I suddenly feel someone petting my back. Or when I'm home alone with my mom, I hear someone walking around on the second floor of the house, constantly moving around in the room above me. I decided to ask my mom what she was looking for, but she was puzzled because she was sitting in the living room on the same floor as I was. It often happens that I hear footsteps around the house while everyone else is in the living room. Also, sometimes I can see half of the house light up with white-blue lights, seemingly out of nowhere. It can't be a light, because we only have yellowish LEDs, and there are no other LEDs bright enough to illuminate the entire area. Additionally, sometimes at night, there's a very loud noise that sounds like a slap. No, it's not a gunshot from outside or the creaking of the wood in the house. I initially thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me and never mentioned it. But one late evening, while cuddling on the couch with my girlfriend, she suddenly twitched and looked shocked. She asked me, almost crying, "Did you see that too?" I hadn't seen anything because I was looking in a different direction. She said there was a white face behind my monitor on my desk, staring at her without a body. Since then, she has seen other things in my house, but hasn't told me about them. A few days ago, I let my dog outside and left her alone in the kitchen to watch over him while I went upstairs to get something. When I came downstairs again, she asked me, "What? Weren't you in the bathroom?" Confused, I asked her what she meant. She said she saw someone in the bathroom and wondered why I didn't turn on the lights. She was so shocked that I asked her if I should check the bathroom. She told me to be careful, and I did, but no one was there. There's absolutely no way someone could have left the bathroom without her noticing, so there definitely was nobody there, but she's certain she saw someone. The next day, we were walking through the dark corridor from my bedroom to the bathroom when she suddenly gripped my arm and pulled me into the bathroom, telling me to hurry. I was confused, and then she said she saw a woman in a dirty old dress standing in our dining room, looking out the window. At first, she wasn't sure if she was seeing things, but after staring for a while, she was certain there was someone standing there. Many people might think this is made up, but it's not. All the things I've told you about actually happened in this house to me, or my girlfriend. I was 14 at the time. I lived at home with my parents and my 10-year-old sister in a normal suburban house in CT. I had always believed in ghosts, but I had never experienced anything and never wanted to. My mom had always been infatuated with ghost shows and paranormal TV. She still is, finding them fascinating and remaining open to the idea. 6 months prior to the event, my aunt, my mom's sister, was diagnosed with melanoma. It was terminal, and treatment did almost nothing as the disease progressed. It became a waiting game to see when, not if, the treatment would stop working. Towards the end of her treatment, I distinctly remember a heaviness in the house. Whether it was my mom's sadness or just a feeling, being at home felt dark. For context, it's important to know the layout of our upstairs. Our house was a standard 2-story, 4-bedroom home. My room was directly next to the staircase, with my parents' and sister's rooms adjacent to each other at the other end of the house. The house was somewhat old, not haunted old, but around 35 years. The upstairs floors creaked when you walked on them. My sister and I knew it all too well from sneaking around at night to get snacks and being caught by our father. One night before my aunt's passing, I was lying in bed with my bedroom door open. The hall nightlight dimly lit the area, preventing it from being pitch black. As I lay there, I distinctly felt a gut-wrenching heaviness and uneasiness in the house. I hated having my door open, but my parents insisted on it for safety. Suddenly, I heard horrific, thunderous footsteps racing from my parents' room, down the hallway, and then down the stairs, fast and heavy. I sat up immediately and listened intently. The footsteps sounded urgent and heavy, like a big man in work boots rushing down the stairs, as if his life depended on it. Next thing I knew, the light came on, and my father sprinted down the stairs. I could hear him searching the house, while my mom stood at the top of the stairs looking down. I asked, "What's going on?" She asked me, "Were you out of bed?" I replied, "No." My dad came back up and asked me the same question, checked on my sister, who was sound asleep, and then double-checked that nobody else was there. My mom ended it with a stern, "Just stay in bed for the night," and left it at that. I remember being more scared than ever before. It was my first unexplained encounter. My mom told me, "It might have been someone coming to visit before taking your aunt home." I wasn't sure how to feel about that, but those footsteps remain vivid in my memory to this day. My family and I moved into our new rental house about 6 months ago. It's a 2-unit house that was built in the early 1900s, and we live on the 2nd floor. The house is located in a historic town in the Midwest and is about a 5-minute drive from the house my mother grew up in. Anyways, in order to do laundry and store our stuff, we have to go down to the basement. Now, I'm really not one who gets creeped out by conventionally scary things. In fact, I love horror movies, games, gory things, etc. When we first moved into our new house, my sister and I joked about how there was probably some ghost of a serial killer who lived in the basement since the place is so old. But now, I'm starting to think that maybe there really is something, or someone, down there. At first, I didn't think much of the basement. Sure, there's no windows, 100-year-old wooden beams, tons of cobwebs, and exposed brick, but nothing out of the ordinary. In fact, in the last place we lived for about 3 years, my bedroom was in the basement. Granted, it was redone and modern, and the complete opposite of our basement now. The basement is split off into 2 different sections, so our neighbor's place sits right above it, and they have the right section of the space, whereas we have the left section. There's plenty of storage down there, but our section is basically just a long hallway with a washer-dryer, and then this weird room at the back of the space. It's sectioned off with a wooden door with super long nails poking out of the beams. At first, when we got to our new place and I started to do laundry, nothing was out of the ordinary. But I feel like the more I go down into the basement, the more I'm starting to realize how the energy is just off down there. It's so difficult to explain what feeling I get, but it's just very dark, like physically and also mentally, because I can feel this kind of darkness inside of me whenever I go down there. I am a very sensitive person with a sensitive spirit. I believe in ghosts and the paranormal and also auras, energies. I believe that rooms and places and people hold all kinds of energy, and they can last for decades and centuries if they're strong enough. Usually, when I go into the basement in the daytime, it's not that bad, and definitely not as strong. Nighttime is a totally different story, though. Just tonight, I went down there to get some laundry out of the washer. I've noticed how I tend to avoid looking at the space off to the right that has the weird blocked-off wooden room. The energy was so dark down there tonight. I felt it pressing down on me, like someone was watching me. So I quickly got the things out of the washer and made my way up the stairs. But I had the feeling and intuition that I shouldn't turn my back, because every time I travel up the stairs, I have to turn the lights off behind me. So it's just this gaping dark hole at my back that leads down to the basement. The entire time I walked upstairs, I looked behind me, and the moment I stepped back into my place, I felt that heavy weight lifts off of my shoulders. Our landlord told us that this house was built before the war, and there are definitely signs of that. The section that we live in, on the second floor, was the maids' quarters. But there are also weird aspects of our place that are very off-putting, like the random boarded-up door in my sister's closet that's so small only a child could fit through. We have no idea what's behind there, but we think it could have been used as a safe space during the World Wars. I honestly, truly believe something bad happened in our section of the basement. Namely, that one sectioned-off room. Maybe it's my mind and paranoia playing tricks on me, but there almost seems to be an evil presence down there. When I was 18 in 2013, I went on a scuba diving trip with my parents to Jamaica. We aren't loaded, but my mom is a travel agent, so she was able to arrange for us to stay at a very old hotel called Round Hill for free or dirt cheap. Many presidents and celebrities have stayed here, and this is also where Rodgers and Hammerstein met the Von Trapps, their inspiration for The Sound of Music. So, it's a beautiful old place with lots of lovely groves, candles, and flowers, and it sets a very private and lovely ambience. On the second night, because I was 18 and wanted my own space, I told my parents I was going to go for a walk. I walked along the path on the beach, which was shielded by lots of bushes and palm trees. I laid down in a hammock and listened to the ocean lapping at the shore while I looked up at the stars. It was so peaceful and lovely. After about 10 or so minutes, I noticed through the trees a woman in white coming up the path, then turning and heading into the ocean. Keep in mind, this is not like a classic beach. You don't swim at this part. The path is completely separated by trees, and then there were a lot of rocks, and then the ocean. Couldn't be more than 20 feet away. She kind of glides over the rocks, not really struggling to navigate them, and begins wading into the water in her dress. I didn't want to scare her if she turned around and saw me watching her, so I said, "Good evening." She turned around, looked at me, softly smiled, and then turned back to the water, and then she was gone. When I say I went completely white, I felt like I was going to vomit. I immediately jumped out of the hammock and began alternating between jogging and power walking back to my room, occasionally getting the courage to look over my shoulder. Suddenly, I ran into my dad head-on, and he looked panicked. I immediately said, "What's wrong?" at the same time that he was asking me if I was okay. He told me that while he and my mom were hanging out in the room, my mom suddenly looked at my dad and said, "We need to find Rachel. I have a really bad feeling something happened." My dad immediately came to find me. I relayed to him the story while we walked, and when we arrived, my mom hugged me. I told her what happened, and she said, "I knew it." When I think about that and do the math on the time, my dad and I met a little over halfway between the villa and where I was. My mom felt that fear at the exact moment that the feeling of dread washed over me. Regardless of what I saw, if it was real or if I was going crazy, the really beautiful thing to me is that my mom and I have some kind of quantum entanglement, and the moment I was impacted by this, so was she. I feel so lucky to have a mother that also feels like a guardian angel to me. I am 16 years old, but I've moved 3 times already, yet I still remember what happened when I was 5 years old. When my mom put me to bed and turned off the light, I saw a tall figure with a top hat, and the worst part was the red eyes. Every time I saw the eyes and the man, I would let out an ear-piercing scream, and my mom would come in scared, seeing me crying and pointing at the corner. She would roll her eyes, put me in her bed, and we would have a blast watching scary movies and action movies. I didn't mind the scary movies. It's just that every time I saw that man, I would let out a scream until it got to the point where my mom just let me sleep in her room. Fast forward, my mom got kicked out of the house for smoking weed. I still loved my mom, but it was weird because when she was gone, the man stopped appearing. But here's the worst part. I saw him in dreams every Tuesday and screamed. When my grandma got tired of the screaming, I slept with my grandpa. Fast forward, I was 12 or maybe 13, and my uncle and aunt just moved in with my cousin. I never got to sleep in my room because it was being used for my newborn cousin. Or, well, he was 2 years old. The only time I was allowed in there was when I went to get toys. But when I slept either downstairs in the basement or upstairs on the floor with my grandpa, I would always get a girl with huge fangs and black eyes. It happened every 1 to 2 weeks, and I would wake up scared, then stay up all night watching TV or playing video games on my grandpa's phone. This kept going until I was 14 and finally moved into my own room. Not even a day later, I got a new ghost, but it was a little boy. He said that his mommy and daddy were sorry about what they had done to me. I was so confused until I realized, and when I woke up the next morning, I looked up my address. Apparently, there was a married couple with a boy who brutally died. Not long after, I moved out because my uncle was given the house and decided to sell it. When I moved into the new house, I got a weird feeling about it. Not to mention the house was old, with a rusty shed out back and old rooms. I didn't care, but I was in this stage where I said, "Forget everyone," and stayed up much longer than everyone else, going to bed at 3 or 2 a.m. During these days, I played COD and GTA, you know, the usual games, and I would hear noises coming from above. Not to mention, when the lights were off, I would hear whispers of how I wanted to hang myself or stab myself. I didn't mention it because I knew I was never suicidal. I had a lot of people who cared about me. As a year went by, things got worse. I kept having nightmares about murder, death, and people screaming about how suicide was the only way out. I said, "Fine, forget it." And then I pulled the same thing at the old house and looked up the history of the house. Apparently, it was the house of a big family that was being hunted and committed suicide by hanging themselves. I was horrified and asked about this to the owner since we were renting. She went pale and ignored me, and I was shocked, but didn't care. Now, this year's date, we got kicked out because the owner got tired of the house payments going up, so she decided to sell it. We moved into my uncle's, but as much as I was there, things started to go missing, and things started to move on their own. I asked my aunt about it, and they knew about it and named the ghost. Instead of being creeped out, I got curious, not because of the history of the house, but because of the ghost. At this point, I wanted to be friendly to the dead. When I have dreams of ghosts that usually scare people, instead, I talk to them. Some don't respond, some do, and some use sign language. I think I've grown a connection to the dead, but I don't mind it at this point. I moved into an apartment about a year ago with my partner, me, and our 1-year-old daughter. We didn't have any unusual experiences until 3 months after we moved in. We heard creaking on the wooden floors, but blamed it on heat. Doors shutting, but we blamed it on the wind. One day, my partner and his friend were over. We have a fan in our bedroom that was turned off. They decided to go for a smoke, and my partner checked to make sure the fan was off to save on electricity. When they came back, the fan was on full speed and on the oscillating setting. They shrugged it off. The second time, my partner and I were getting ready for bed. I was in bed on my phone, and he went to the kitchen to take some medication. Suddenly, there was a loud bang on the floor. He ran in and said, "Did you hear that?" I asked, "What did you drop? You're going to wake our daughter." He replied, "A knife literally flew off the counter to the other side of the kitchen." We both ran in, and the knife was just there on the other side. My partner had a lot of paranormal experiences in his childhood home, but nothing since we moved here. That same night, I had a dream of 2 shadow spirits trying to move me out of the apartment. I told them to leave, but they wouldn't. They tried to hurt me, and I woke up and checked the baby monitor. My daughter was fine. I went back to sleep and had the same dream. My eyes were on the monitor, staring at it. There were 2 shadow spirits, a teenage boy and a little girl. The boy kept reaching into my daughter's crib. I said, "Don't you dare touch her," and he kept pulling his hand away and putting it back in. When he finally touched her, I woke up, and my daughter was screaming. My partner and I went to her, fed her, and she was fine. That morning, we found the baby monitor was disconnected. When it runs out of charge, it makes an alarm sound, but we didn't hear anything. We checked the camera on my phone and saw she woke up multiple times, screaming and staring at the wall where the shadow stood. Since then, multiple things have happened. Orbs caught on camera, shadows walking around her room and crib, flashing lights on the camera, and her building blocks being messed with. One day, my daughter and I fell asleep on the sofa. My mother was coming from London and told me to watch for an Amazon parcel. While I was asleep, I dreamt of going to the lobby to get the parcel. A woman I had never seen before came next to me and said, "If you want to see him, go to floor 6. I asked, "See who?" She replied, "If you want to see the demon, go to floor 6. I immediately woke up to the doorbell ringing. It was my mother waiting for me to open the door. The strange occurrences continued, especially in my daughter's room. We contacted our local church for a house blessing. We learned that the apartment blocks were built on what used to be a massive church and several graveyards from the 17th and the 19th century, one of which is still there at the top of the gardens by the shops. After the house blessing, we still experienced some odd things, like the building blocks being played with but it was mostly quiet. Until the past couple of weeks, when the apartment still felt like it had something here. It started again with creaking, things falling on the floor, and the front door handle being messed with. I've been on the force for over 20 years, and I thought I had seen it all. Murders, assaults, the kind of depravity that makes you lose faith in humanity. But nothing prepared me for what I encountered that night in the old Hamilton house. It was a quiet evening in our small town, the kind of night where you could hear the crickets chirping and the wind rustling through the trees. I was just finishing my shift when the call came in, a noise complaint from the Hamilton place. That house had been abandoned for years, ever since Old Man Hamilton passed away. No one had the guts to buy it, not with all the rumors about it being haunted. I drove out there, thinking it was probably some kids messing around. The place looked just as I remembered. A dilapidated Victorian mansion, windows boarded up, ivy creeping up the sides like skeletal fingers. I parked my cruiser and grabbed my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. As I approached the front door, I noticed it was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, the hinges groaning like a wounded animal. The air inside was thick with dust and decay. The smell was overwhelming, a mix of mold and something else, something metallic, blood. My flashlight flickered as I stepped inside, the floorboards creaking under my weight. "Hello? This is the police," I called out, my voice echoing through the empty halls. There was no response, just the eerie silence of an abandoned house. I moved deeper into the house, my heart pounding in my chest. Every shadow seemed to twist and writhe, as if the darkness itself was alive. I reached the living room and saw something that made my blood run cold. In the center of the room, there was a circle of candles, their flames flickering eerily. In the middle of the circle lay a body. I approached cautiously, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The body was that of a man, his eyes wide open, staring blankly at the ceiling. His mouth was twisted into a silent scream, and his chest was covered in strange symbols, carved deep into his flesh. I recognized the man immediately. It was Joe, one of the local drunks who often caused trouble around town. But what was he doing here? And who did this to him? I reached for my radio to call for backup when I heard a noise behind me, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper. I spun around, my flashlight catching a glimpse of something moving in the shadows. "Who's there?" I shouted, but there was no answer. Just that whispering, growing louder and more insistent. I backed away, my pulse racing, when I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I spun around again, but there was no one there. The whispering grew louder, surrounding me, filling my head with unintelligible words. I stumbled back, my flashlight falling to the floor and rolling away, plunging me into darkness. In the dim light of the candles, I saw them, figures, shadowy and indistinct, moving toward me. Their eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and their mouths moved in unison, chanting something in a language I couldn't understand. I tried to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I was paralyzed, rooted to the spot as they closed in around me. One of the figures stepped forward, its face inches from mine. It grinned, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. "You shouldn't have come here," it hissed, its breath cold against my skin. I screamed, finally finding my voice, and everything went black. When I came to, I was lying outside the house, the sun rising in the distance. My flashlight was beside me, its beam cutting through the early morning mist. I scrambled to my feet and ran to my cruiser, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the keys. I drove straight to the station, not daring to look back. I reported what I saw, but no one believed me. They found Joe's body, but there was no sign of the symbols, no evidence of the figures I saw. They said it was just a noise complaint, that I must have imagined everything in the darkness. But I know what I saw, and every night since then, I hear the whispering, growing louder, calling me back to the Hamilton house. I know they're waiting for me, and I fear one day I'll have no choice but to go back. For context, this happened to me while camping on the school grounds, something related to Girl Scouts. Now this story is quite short because it was a personal experience and only the important details I remembered. Each day, we were assigned different roles to help during eating hours. At that time, my friend MJ and I were chosen to be on dish duty, which meant we were to wash the dishes after meals. While our other teammates were busy cooking and helping, MJ and I were instructed to take a break while waiting for them. We were walking back to our room, laughing, because we remembered one of our classmates said that one of the Boy Scouts from the school had an attractive cousin. It was really funny, though. So, this was a long time ago, but I still remember it vividly since it spooked me out. I was in 3rd or 4th grade at the time. We entered our room and went to the single stall at the corner, which was our washroom. MJ was ahead of me and arrived at the stall first. She told me that someone was inside because she heard the faucet running and the toilet flushing. So, we waited in line for the person to come out. We kept on waiting until MJ said she had to go out and check on our classmates and schoolmates. She left me there, and I continued waiting for so long. I was sure someone was in there because the faucet was obviously running and the toilet flushed. Our toilet's flush system was broken too, so an object's weight couldn't have triggered the flush button. It had to be flushed manually. But it was odd. The stall's light was turned off. About 10 minutes later, MJ came back to check if I was done taking a bath. I explained how the person still hadn't come out. We tried knocking, but nobody answered. So, we opened the unlocked door. No one was inside, and the faucet was turned off. I was very scared at that time. The faucet could have been running because our teacher who was in the room could have turned it on. But no, I had been there the whole time, keeping my eye on the washroom stall. So it would be impossible because the faucet was turned off tight when we opened it. And the flushing too. I still wonder what it could have been. I work as a receptionist at a swim school. I'm the first person you see when you enter, and you can't get through the building without passing me. Today was super empty due to renovations, so the instructors were doing drills. There's a camera facing the entrance towards the front desk, and another camera behind the front desk, pointing towards the entrance. The director at that location is always vigilant through the cameras. Down a hallway is the locker room, and to enter it, you have to pass a big window that's facing the pool. There's no camera in that hallway. Since it was empty, I started reading The Stand by Stephen King on the computer. Even if I'm reading, I'm always vigilant. I saw the next student wouldn't be there for another hour, so I was relaxed until my director called me. She asked me if I asked the man that came in if he was there for scheduled classes. I was confused and asked who, and she repeated herself. I started apologizing. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry I didn't see anyone come in." Then she hangs up and heads towards the locker room through the pool deck. She comes back out, and asks a male instructor to check the men's locker room, and they find no one. There is no other exit towards the locker room, and I saw no one. I asked my supervisor, who confirmed that's what happened, couldn't hear through the glass, and then asked another instructor if they saw anybody. He said that one of the female instructors said she waved to a boy heading into the locker room, but again, nobody was there. I find it so strange that whatever they saw, I didn't see, even though you had to enter through the front. I don't know whether to be thankful or bummed. There are two types of school teachers, those who come early and those who stay late. I have always been one of the former, and most days arrive at school prior to sunup. This is a story that happened around 6:30 a.m. before the light of day. It's also something I still think of often because it's extremely disturbing. The school I was working at during this time in my career, 2020, had a large parking lot in the back of the school that was unseen from the main road. It was approximately a quarter of a mile back because the school had been built onto. The point is that unless you knew it was back there, you wouldn't go looking for it. I was the first person there that morning, as usual, and was waiting to hear the end of a newscast when I saw headlights pull in behind me. This was out of the ordinary because most teachers wouldn't show up until about 7 a.m. I was also thrown due to the fact that this person left their lights on, and instead of parking in a space, they stayed behind me, parked at an angle. I thought about getting out of the car, but decided I'd wait until more teachers showed up. At first, I thought maybe it was a parent, but the more I watched them, I began to think this person was sinister as they rolled down their window and smoked a cigarette. It was a white male with a scraggly beard and hair, a rough appearance. We sat there in total silence for 15 to 20 minutes, and all the while, this guy never took his eye off the back of that school. When a few teachers showed up, I hopped out of my car, and they too thought he was odd. I called my principal. He didn't answer. But later I mentioned this entire story to our campus cop. He said he'd check the cameras. Later, by third period, the cop came looking for me, and he seemed rattled. He wanted to know if by chance I'd gotten the car's plate. I didn't. He looked dejected when I said no, and then he turned to me and said that he'd watched this guy pull in at 6:30 and then wait, watching for about an hour or more, only to leave. He had no reason to be there, and the police officer said the man's body language and overall vibe was very concerning. In hindsight, I don't think he was interested in me or the teachers, but instead may have been watching the children. This is a story I still think of. It truly leaves me asking one question. Why was he there when he had no reason to be? And what were his motives to pull into a hidden school parking lot at 6:30 a.m., where kids begin arriving very early after being dropped off by their working parents? These events happened to me between the ages 6 and 9. Everything began when I was visiting my cousin when I was 6 years old. My cousin was a year older than me, and back then, she was very adventurous, so we went into the forest near my school. Everything in the forest went normal, and it was around 1 p.m., so we weren't expecting anything weird to happen. Until we climbed down a small hill, and I slipped to the ground. My cousin came down to help me, but as soon as she got down, a big shadow jumped over us. We both saw and heard it, and swore to each other we didn't lie about it. We knew it couldn't have been an animal, because we were in a small forest surrounded by a city. We ran out of the forest because we were little and got scared easily. 1 year later, I was again with my cousin, and we had come to the conclusion that what we saw was an animal. Again, we decided to go on a little adventure, but this time to a different forest around 2 kilometers away from the last forest. We were looking after an old bunker from the Second World War, which my friends had told me about. But since we were braver than before, we went there at 6 p.m., and it was already getting dark. We looked for the bunker for hours, but decided to split up after looking around for a long time. I had gotten used to this forest already, even though I never saw the bunker. But this time the forest felt different. It felt like I was in a forest far away from the city, and I couldn't recognize anything, even though the sun hadn't fully gone down. I shouted my cousin's name because it was already coming so late we had to go back home, but to no response. I started panicking a little and ran into a random direction until I recognized a rope swing in one of the trees and knew I was close to the forest's edge. I walked along the path until I heard my cousin shouting my name, and I stopped and shouted back. Then she came over a little hill and ran to me. She said she was shouting my name and was irritated that I hadn't responded. I told her I was shouting too, but neither of us heard each other back there. We went back home and didn't think more about what happened. Almost 2 years later, we were back in the forest looking for the bunker we remember when talking about some old memories. This time, we didn't split up and actually found the bunker we looked inside with our flashlight and were disgusted of what we saw. Inside the old bunker, there was old burned candles, a pentagram, and some liquids. We didn't want to stay near the bunker and left fast because we thought someone might come there. Everything was normal until we got to the old rope swing. It was swinging back and forth when we came near it. No one else was there with us, so we took up our pace, knowing we were near home. When we already saw her home, we heard footsteps behind us. We looked behind, but saw nothing. Still, the footsteps were coming towards us until I felt a bump on my shoulder, and the footsteps passed us. I looked at my cousin and asked her if she heard the footsteps, and she nodded. I was the most scared I had ever been, and we ran straight to her home and told her mom. But reasonably, she didn't believe us when we told about the footsteps. To this day, I haven't told anyone about these experiences and never thought to connect them together. But now that I'm older, I realized how similar they were to each other. It all took place when I was 8. Me and this girl from my block were playing on her trampoline. We got bored, so we started telling scary stories. Little did I know she had something up her sleeve as she got her older brother, whom I had never met, to dress in a clown costume. As she told me this story, she said, "I had an uncle that went to prison because he killed kids." Next to the trampoline, there was a small alleyway where her brother ran out holding a butter knife. Back then, I thought it was a real knife, so I ran, and he chased me and pretended to run after his sister. When I hid behind a wall and peered, I saw that he was standing over her with blood all over her shirt. I later found out it was fake blood. He looked up and chased after me. I ran and hid behind a building and saw an opening in the fence that connected to the forest. I crawled into the forest and ran behind a bush, waiting and listening for him. I heard him run past. I peeked and watched him look into the forest, and then he ran off to find me, presumably. I looked around and walked deeper into the forest. This was the first time I had ever been in the forest. I made it to a clearing that had wood stumps placed like seats around a fire. I sat down on one of them, sighed, and wiped my forehead, looking around and wondering why this all happened. Suddenly, I heard the brother walking towards me, so I dove headfirst behind a bush. I heard him pass by. I turned around and jumped in shock. There, nestled into the bramble and bush, was a wooden man. The man stood like a soldier at attention. He was smiling. His eyes looked like they were staring at me, but also hollow, like his soul was sucked out. I stood up. Then I heard it. I heard whispers. At first, they were nearly silent. Then they grew. The whispers were of children. Then a deep, manly voice said, "Hey, little girl, it looks like you're not having fun." At first, I thought they were talking to someone else, but the whispers kept talking to me. My voice still scared. I said out loud, "Woo, who's there?" I looked around, terrified. "Oh, you're a boy? Well, that's just as good. You want to play a game?" I looked around. "Who is it? Where are you?" "Why, I'm right in front of you." But in front of me was the wooden man. I looked closely, and it had changed. Its hands were closed, and its eyes wider. It had now spawned a wild look. This made me terrified. "Well," the voice rang out with a hint of playfulness. I looked at the figure, then around me, and said quietly, "No thanks." Then the wind howled, and I heard, "Too bad." Suddenly, the wooden man began shaking before it took a step, and I realized it wasn't made of wood. It was a man. "Haven't you heard of the tale?" I stood in fear as the man, painted to look like wood, walked closer. Suddenly, the adrenaline of being able to run hit me again, and I bolted out to the clearing. There, I saw the girl and her brother. They were sitting on the wooden stools, bored, waiting for me. When they saw me, they froze. As they saw the man behind me, I immediately hid behind the brother, who raised his butter knife. The man grabbed it from him with ease and pushed him to the ground. The man smiled an unhinged smile before going to grab me. Me and the girl rushed towards the opening of the fence. The girl's brother bolted out with us. As we passed the clearing, we looked back. The man stood still like a statue, but still looking at us. We ran to our respective homes and told our parents, who called the police. The police searched where we said the man was, but there was only the butter knife and a wooden statue of a man standing like a soldier at attention. Now, you wouldn't think it was true if it only happened once when I was that age. When I was 15 last years, I had forgotten what happened, and I went into the forest with one of my close friends. We walked exactly to where the wooden stools were. I sat at the stool while my friend went to pee. Then I heard him scream and rush into the clearing. Behind him was an enclosing shadow that came closer with purpose. It was him. I don't know how, but I recognized him, and I ran with my friend out of the forest. I don't know, but all the memories flooded back into my mind. The same thing happened with the police. They didn't find him. I fear someday he won't be stopping by the fence. Next time a poor soul crosses him. Thanks for watching our video. Have you ever had a really scary experience? We want to hear about it. You can tell us in 2 ways. Option 1 is, write down what happened and email it to us. The email address is in the description below. We're excited to read your story and learn all about what happened. And the second option is, record your story using your phone's recording feature. Make sure the sound is good, with no background noise. We want to make sure everyone can hear your scary story clearly. Pick whichever option works best for you, and let's explore your spooky experiences together. We're looking forward to hearing from you. And if you liked this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel.